welcome again to World Literature 2. And now, after our journey to the west in China, we are moving to another type of journey, this time in Japan. And this journey is, wow, the world's really moving there, isn't it? Now, this journey is it's a very different type of experience. This one is a psychological journey, a sensual journey, and a spiritual journey. So let's look at Ihara Saikaku's Life of a Sensuous Woman. Before we begin our analysis, let's look a little bit at some of the historical and cultural aspects of Japan during the time of Ihara Saikaku and his famous work. So let's begin our discussion of Ihara Saikaku's Life of a Sensuous Woman. And the best place to start is with an ukiyo-e, which was a woodblock print that was highly popular in this time period in Japan. And in this particular ukiyo-e, we have a courtesan looking in a mirror. And this becomes in some ways emblematic of the narrative as a whole, where we have the narrator, who interestingly has no name, as she looks back at her life. She recounts her life to the two young men, and it's very much a self-portrait, a reflective self-portrait, and also similar in some ways to a Buddhist confessional. Notice too the emphasis on the back of the neck, which was highly eroticized in this time period in Japan. The Tokugawa or Edo Jidai period occurred between 1603 and 1868 in Japanese history. And at this time, Japan was ruled by the shoguns and the country's approximately 200 to 300 regional daimyo, or lords. In this period, you have rapid economic growth, you have strict social order, and the merchant class in particular really grows. And so society is stabilized. Before this, you had a long period of civil wars and disorder, chaos. The cities become extremely important, very cultural centers. And you have the elite samurai, warrior class at the top. They don't have the wars to fight, so they're settling down. Well, maybe not settling down, but they are settling into these city centers for work, for the bureaucratic issues and power things, but also to play for the entertainment. The heads of the government at this time were the shoguns, and each of these shoguns is a member of the Tokugawa clan. And this is a really long period of stability in Japan, lasting well over 250 years. And here we also have a picture of the first shogun, Tokugawa Ieyasu. Even though rule by the shoguns was extremely strict, they also provided education to the common classes, and this created a demand for new literatures, especially ones that reflected common everyday life, like we see with Life of a Sensuous Woman. Haikai became extremely popular during the 17th century. Christian missionaries earlier had set up the printing press with movable type, and the first shogun, Tokugawa Ieyasu, had prominent Confucian text and administrative and military type works printed in the early 1600s. So commercial printing really took off. You had bookstores targeting the common class. Think of an old school Barnes and Noble, and the literacy rate grew dramatically. And again, the merchants had some money to spend, so you're seeing that also as part of that confluence of issues. During the second half of the century, you had 650 haikai titles published, and they were the second most popular category printed books after the Buddhist devotional text. And we'll be exploring haikai and haiku with Basho here shortly. The Tokugawa shoguns ruled from Edo Castle, and you have a picture of that here. And that's why you have this time period also called the Edo period. The Kyoto emperor was really more of a figurehead at this time. And the domain lords, the daimyo, kept estates in Edo where their women and children, you can kind of think of them as almost as hostages. And the domain lords had to live, they had to alternate years living in Edo and then also living in their provinces. And that kind of kept them in line. It kept control and stability. But because of this, you had an interesting kind of cross-cultural exchange, and you had the development of the urban centers and the culture. In 1868, when the shogunate came to an end, the city of Edo was renamed Tokyo, which translates as Eastern Capital. And the emperor moved his residence to Tokyo, and making the city the formal capital of Japan, as opposed to the previous one in Kyoto. To control prostitution and to separate it away from Edo, not being officially condoned by the shoguns, brothels were consolidated into a pleasure district called Yashiwara. This district was walled off and surrounded by a moat. 2 miles outside of the city, it was only accessible through a main gate to monitor clients and to prevent courtesans from leaving. And this image shows courtesans on display through these lattice-like walls that resemble, in a disturbing fashion, cages at a zoo or symbolically a prison cell. And these women were trapped, in a sense, in these careers. By 1800, in fact, densely populated Yashiwara was home to more than 4,000 prostitutes. Now, this district was part of what the Japanese referred to as Ukiyo, or the floating world, which also included the kabuki theaters of Edo. Like Shakespeare's Globe Theater in 1599, around the same time at the beginning of the Edo period, actors in the theater were associated with loose morals, houses of prostitution, etc. Basically the wrong side of the tracks, or in the case of the Globe, on the wrong side of the Thames. And this was away from the Puritans in London in Shakespeare's time. And with Shakespeare, you had male actors dressing as women. For example, in Romeo and Juliet, all the parts were played by men originally. In Kabuki, also, you had male actors portraying women. So you can kind of think of the Yashiwara Pleasure District in Edo or Old Tokyo as Las Vegas today, kind of a more cultured version of Las Vegas today, perhaps. And in fact, the ukiyo-e, these woodblock printed artworks that we'll be looking at, were used to advertise and glamorize this world of the courtesans, the kabuki actors, the sumo wrestlers. Just like movies today tend to glamorize Las Vegas in movies like the Ocean's 11 series. As they say in their marketing, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens in Yashiwara stays in Yashiwara. And that kind of goes along with that idea that it is separate symbolically. Vegas is outside of the rest of the United States as kind of we're going to keep all the bad stuff away from mainstream society. You even see that in pop culture in works such as The Stand by Stephen King, where all the evil forces at the end of the world congregate around Las Vegas. So the wives of the daimyo and the high-ranking samurai were expected to follow the Confucian ideals of the family. They were expected to dress modestly and serve their husbands. However, the feudal lords looked to courtesans in these pleasure districts to find passion and love. These young women who were born into these poor farming and fishing villages were sold to brothels by their parents, usually around the ages of 7 or 8. And this was kind of justified in their idea by Confucian ideals that the children have to work off their duty to their parents. They owe an obligation to the parents. And these were these 10-year contracts, basically, that the girls would have to work off. And when they first arrived, the little girls would do daily chores at the brothels. They would tend to their older sister courtesans, and they'd learn the tricks of this trade, such as how to write love letters and fake tears. If the child were really gifted around the age of 11 or 12, she would be chosen for this elite courtesan training, where she would learn the etiquette, the manners, the refined art from the masters. Learning how to play, for example, the samisen, the three-stringed instrument, to sing, to paint, to write haiku, calligraphy, dance, perform the tea ceremony, even playing games like Go, backgammon, and kickball. So she would be well-read and literate in order to engage in stimulating conversation with her high-powered clients. The harsh reality in Yashiwara, though, is that the high-ranking courtesans, even the low-ranking prostitutes, all suffered from venereal disease and the hardships of being unwanted children, basically. The courtesans in particular wore toxic lead makeup to whiten their faces, necks, and hands and feet. Many prostitutes died by the age of 20. One graveyard in Edo, for example, contains the remains of over 20,000 of these prostitutes that had no connections, many of them in their 20s. No one even to cover the cost of their funerals. And the brothel owners ranked the women in Yoshiwara in this rigid hierarchical scheme, with the most inexpensive and quick moat-side prostitutes being the lowest rank, with the elite celebrity-style courtesans at the top. And these high-ranking courtesans were basically celebrities of the day. They had the most comfortable lives of the prostitutes, with the garments, the kimonos, the bedding, the education, etc. But most prostitutes in Yoshiwara were not this fortunate. In 1642, Yoshiwara is recorded as having 881 prostitutes on the lower tiers, and about 106 courtesans in the upper tiers. Originally, the Buddhist term yukio referred to the sorrow and grief caused by desire, which was seen as an impediment to enlightenment. This Buddhist idea that desire is suffering. In the Buddhist context, yukio was written with characters that meant suffering world, which again is this concept that desire leads to suffering, and that's the root of all the problems in the world. But in the 17th century in Edo, that term was turned on its head, and the term yukio was written with new characters to mean floating world. And this idea of the floating world was ignoring the problems that might have existed in this very strict, regulated society, and abandoning yourself. You're just kind of going along with the currents and the flows of pleasure. Then it became associated with two particular sites in Edo, and that's the Kabuki Theater District, the Yoshiwara Pleasure Quarter. And the art of the floating world is yukio-e, which means floating world pictures, and it usually depicts these types of subjects. And in the future in the course, not too far from now, we're going to be looking at William Blake, who has kind of a similar idea with some of his works in the Romantic era. The road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom. So just remember that on Friday and Saturday night. And here we see one of the most famous ukiyo-e artworks, and really representative of Japan. This is internationally famous, is this particular one, Under a Wave off Kanagawa by Hokusai.